Someone once told me a very small story, but it has stayed with me ever since. One evening after a family dinner, he, only 17 at the time, hesitantly said to his mother, "I don't think I believe the same way anymore." In that moment, he wasn't asking permission to do something wrong. He was only asking permission to be honest with himself. But his mother stood up, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear, and said a sentence he has never forgotten. "Saying that means you are betraying God." He told me, "From that day on, I wasn't just afraid of God anymore. I was afraid of my own family. I was afraid of the dinner table. I was afraid of the hymns I used to know by heart. I felt like I had committed something terrible just by admitting a thought." Many years later, after he had started working and living independently, he no longer went to church. Online, he wrote harsh comments about Christianity. Some people said, "That guy hates religion." But if you look more deeply, what is speaking inside him is not pure hatred. It is more like a wound speaking in the voice of anger. And anger, sometimes, is just pain that has never been properly named. That is why we need to talk about the psychology of people who hate Christianity with a mindset that is both clear-eyed and humane. No idealizing, no labeling, no assuming anyone is born bad. Because hate is rarely the starting point. It is often the end point of a long road, one marked by hurt, fear, coercion, identity conflict, collective memory, and deep disappointment in people acting in the name of the sacred. This essay follows those psychological layers in the same structure already analyzed, but goes further, not only the causes, but the mechanisms. Why an experience turns into aversion, why aversion turns into hatred, and why that hatred can sometimes last so long that people no longer remember what they are even hating. If I had to choose the most common root of hating religion, I would choose negative personal experience. Not because Christianity is inherently harmful, but because any belief system, once embedded in human life, can be distorted by how people practice it. On paper, religion may speak of love. In lived experience, it is sometimes transmitted through fear. In psychology, there is a simple phenomenon. Emotions bind to memory. A child does not only remember teachings, they remember the speaker's face, the atmosphere in the room, the feeling of being stared at, compared, or of disappointing one's parents. If a child hears about God in a context of yelling, coercion, or humiliation, the brain links religion with threat. Over time, merely mentioning religion can trigger a danger response, racing heart, defensiveness, bodily tension. Many people say, "I hate religion because it made me afraid." But in truth, they are not afraid of God. They are afraid of an image of God used as a disciplinary tool. When a child is taught that God sees everything, God will punish you, faith ceases to be gentle trust. It becomes a surveillance camera installed inside the mind. From this emerges a particular psychological state, vague guilt. One no longer knows exactly what is wrong, only that I might be wrong. That sense of maybe I'm wrong forces people to live in constant vigilance. As adults, some turn vigilance into obedience. Others turn it into rebellion. Rebellion often erupts most strongly when a person realizes, "I have been afraid for too long." Another crucial point: personal trauma is not only born of fear, but also of broken love. Many people say they once loved their faith deeply, but when they fell, they were not embraced, they were judged, exposed before the community, labeled sinners. Worse still, some were cut off by their own family. You are no longer part of this family if you leave the faith. Here, hating religion no longer becomes a position, It becomes a survival response. People hate in order to protect themselves from being abandoned again. Hatred is like building a fence. The higher the fence, the less one is hurt, but also the harder it becomes to see any goodness on the other side. And so the irony is this: many people who hate Christianity were once the ones who most longed to believe. They sought meaning, salvation, warmth. But instead of warmth, they received pressure. Instead of salvation, they received the feeling of not being pure enough. The higher the expectation, the deeper the disappointment, and the deeper the disappointment, the easier hatred forms. There is a line that once crossed makes any belief provoke resistance. The line between "I believe" and "you must believe." Many people don't hate Christianity as a spiritual system. They hate the feeling of being forced to live by someone else's standards. And in society, religion often comes with very specific norms: whom you may marry, whether divorce is allowed, abortion, gender and sexuality, male-female roles. When someone does not live by those norms, they are seen as deviant. Psychology calls this a conflict between autonomy and normative power. Humans have a strong need for autonomy to decide their own lives. When autonomy is threatened, the body responds with fight or flight. If people cannot flee their family or community, they fight through words, attitudes, sarcasm, or outright rejection of the entire system. A common example is interfaith marriage. When love turns into a test of faith, when someone is forced to choose between the person they love and the system they belong to, that tearing sensation is profoundly cruel. Some choose to convert in order to marry, but accumulate resentment inside. Over time, that resentment can turn into hatred, hatred of a system that made love conditional. What matters here is this: people who hate religion often hate coercion more than belief itself. But because coercion comes from people representing religion, they merge the two. Any belief system experienced as a command will be hated like an authoritarian figure.
Another psychological layer comes from cognitive conflict. People feel that belief demands acceptance of things that exceed or contradict their understanding of the world. For those inclined towards science, philosophy, and critical thinking, faith itself is not the issue. The issue is when faith is used to silence questions. When someone asks, "Why does God allow suffering?" that question is not always defiance. It can be despair seeking comfort. But if the answer is, "Don't ask, that's God's will," the person feels rejected. Not just denied information, but denied their dignity as a thinking human being. This creates a psychological pattern, feeling intellectually disrespected. People can accept being wrong, but they struggle to accept being treated as stupid. And when a system makes them feel diminished, they reclaim dignity by rejecting the system itself. Here, hatred of religion can be the reaction of the intellectual self. People do not want to be placed in the role of only listen and obey. They want dialogue. Without dialogue, they leave. But if they are pursued by judgment even after leaving, "You've fallen, you're tempted by evil," they will not just leave, they will return to fight back. Interestingly, many people say they hate religion because it is illogical. But if you listen closely, they often hate how religion is used to deny logic. What they reject may not be faith, but the monopoly on truth and the prohibition against questioning. Some people hate religion without ever having lived in a religious community. Their hatred comes from collective memory, historical narratives, social discourse, media images. In social psychology, attitudes are often built on symbols rather than direct experience. Christianity, in many contexts, is associated with violent or coercive chapters of history. Even if today's believers did not commit those acts, the symbol remains like a ghost, and that ghost is enough to provoke reaction. Beyond distant history, there is recent history, scandals, abuse, cover-ups. When a system claiming moral authority reveals deep corruption, public outrage follows. The outrage is stronger when harm is committed in the name of the sacred. Higher moral expectations make moral collapse more painful. At this level, hatred of religion is hatred of collective hypocrisy, or of the sense that religion protects power more than victims. When someone believes religion shields authority instead of the vulnerable, they will hate it as they would any other unjust structure. This is the deepest and most painful layer, when people are judged not for what they do, but for who they are. If someone grows up realizing they are LGBTQ+, or a woman unwilling to live within traditional roles, or someone whose emotional life does not match community norms, they may receive a brutal message: your very being is wrong. Repeated long enough, this message creates existential shame, shame for existing. Existential shame differs from guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Existential shame says, I am wrong. And I am wrong cannot be fixed with apology. It can only be resolved by rejecting oneself or rejecting the system that imposed that judgment. Here, hating religion can be an act of self-preservation. If I must choose between living and being accepted by this system, I choose to live. When survival requires struggle, hatred can become a weapon. Weapons may be rough, but those who wield them are rarely evil. They are often people pushed into a corner. Many people hate religion because they encounter believers or religious authorities who behave badly, arrogant, judgmental, hypocritical, or manipulative. They see the gap between sermons and lives, and that gap erodes trust. Psychology describes a moral disgust response. When something is betrayed precisely where purity is expected, disgust arises. Disgust turns into anger, and anger seeks a label. That label becomes Christianity. We should also acknowledge clumsy evangelism. Phrases like, "Have you believed yet?" or "If you don't follow, you'll go to hell," or "You are very sinful," even if sincerely believed, create feelings of threat and disrespect. When threatened, people do not open up, they fortify. And when the walls grow too high, instead of saying, "I'm uncomfortable," people say, "I hate it." Finally, there is a form of religion hatred shaped by social media, hatred as personality. Online, anger is rewarded with likes. Sarcasm is seen as intelligence. People learn to hate in order to be seen. Yet even this form is not empty. It often rests on genuine disappointment, just packaged into viral-friendly content. And once someone grows accustomed to communicating through anger, returning to ordinary conversation becomes difficult. When discussing the psychology of those who hate Christianity, the most important thing is not to prove them right or wrong. It is to see the human being behind the word hate. Some hate because they were forced, some because they were judged, some because their intelligence was dismissed, some because their identity was denied, some because they saw power hiding behind faith, and some because they are simply exhausted by debates where no one listens. If we understand this, we see that hatred of religion is not merely an attitude, it is a signal of rupture. And rupture cannot be healed by winning arguments. It can only be healed by restoring each other's dignity, where believers are not treated as foolish and non-believers are not treated as fallen, where faith is not turned into a club and freedom is not turned into mockery. Perhaps the kindest thing one can do when hearing someone say, "I hate religion," is not to counterattack immediately, but to ask, "What happened to you?"
Because sometimes behind the sentence, I hate, there is another sentence, smaller, weaker, but more truthful. I am in pain.